Ohai. Tzfat, the city in the northern district of Israel, one of 4 sacred cities for Jews, along with Jerusalem, Tiberias and Hebron. Is at the height of 900 m above sea level, at top of one of the mountains of Upper Galilee. Distance to Haifa -75 km, to Tel Aviv about 160 km, to Jerusalem about 200 km. From height at which there is a city surprisingly beautiful view opens, and in the southeast it is possible to observe Tiberias Lake, in the west the Mediterranean Sea, and in the north the top covered with snow Hermon.
After Massachusetts' exile of Jews from Spain in 1492 and the forced departure from Portugal in order to avoid Christianization, the whole group of the most famous rabbis mystics running from Inquisition prosecution moved here.
Among them there were Moshe Cordovera's Kabbalists, written the books devoted to the hidden parties of the Torah in Tzfat.
Rabbi Yosef Karo, who created the fundamental set of the Jewish laws, Shulchan Aruch.
Composer of the Shabbatni anthem of Lech Dodi, Shlomo Galevi Alkabetz. At the end of 1569 or at the beginning of 1570 in Tzfat there arrived Yitzhak Luria.
The inflow of Sephardic Jews throughout the 15th, 16th centuries, which reached the peak in the period of government of Sultan Suleiman I Salim II, was turned by Tzfat into the global center of the Jewish education and the regional center of trade.
In the 16th, 17th centuries Tzfat found glory as the center of a Kabbalah, or the Jewish mysticism.
Till 1948 most of the population was made by the Arabs, subsequently expelled by the Jewish armed groups as a result of the Arab-Israeli War.
1947-1949. Near Tzfat there are numerous graves of the Jewish wise men of last times. One of the most known, a grave of Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon of Bars of Yakea, and his son. Hundreds of thousands of people come to anniversary of his death, Loso Omer, in the 33rd day after the first day of passage to his grave with the expectations. Other grave, Rabbi Jonathan ben Uziel, is in the place called Amuk.
According to the book by Judges, the area in which Tzfat is located was allocated to Ani Nephilmova.
The legend says that Tzfat was based by the son Noah after the flood. Tzfat identified with Sep, strengthened by the Jewish city in the top Galilee, which is mentioned in works of the Roman Jewish historian Joseph Flavia. Tzfat is mentioned in the Jerusalem Talmud how one of 5 sublime places on which fires for the notification about a new moon and holidays at the time of the Second Temple were kindled. He was among fortified cities where zealot insurgents were fixed. This city appears in the Jewish sources of the late Middle Ages. In the 12th century, Tzfat was the strengthened city in the Jerusalem kingdom of Crusaders, known under the name Safed. In 1102 Knights of the Award of Hospitalia, seeking to put strategic height under the control, constructed big fortress here with a double wall which height reached 28 meters, and on an external wall there are 7 towers. Around this fortress the city also began to develop.
Benjamin from Tudela, who visited the city at the time, doesn't mention one Jew who would live in him. In 1240 Theobald Navarsky, during the crusade to the Holy Land, conducted negotiations with Muslim Ubadami Damascus and Egypt and signed the contract with the first minds, the last according to which the Jerusalem kingdom received Jerusalem plus Bethlehem, Nazareth and the most part of the Galilee area, with a set of fortresses of Templars again, such as Safed. In 1260 Baybars declared the contract invalid because of the French-Mongolian unions directed against Muslims and participation of Christians in a Middle Eastern campaign of Mongols, and undertook a series of attacks on the fortresses located in this region, including on Safed.
In 1266 he exterminated the Christian Tamplierski population and turned the city into Muslim, under the name Safed Safed.
Samuel bin Samson, who visited the city in 13th century, mentions existence of the Jewish community numbering at least 50 people there.
It agrees ad-Damovki to the dead in Safeda in 1327. Which wrote about 1300, Baybars having razed to the ground old fortress, I constructed a round tower and called her. The tower is constructed to 3 floors. It is provided with provisions, both halls and military warehouses.
Under this place there is a tank for rainwater which is enough to supply garrison of fortress of the end of the year and until the end of the year.
It agrees Abu al-Fida, Safed was the city of the average sizes.
In there is very reliably constructed fortress which dominates over the Lake Tabariya.
There are underground water courses bringing drinking water to Surfgate. Its suburbs cover 3 hills.
Since Labama Malik Haldehar won this area at Franks, it is turned into the central parking for the troops protecting all coastal cities of this area.
In the Middle Ages the Kurdish quarter existing up to 19th century was founded. At Ottoman Bordsfat was the capital of the Sandak of the same name, covering the most part of Galilee and stretching to the Mediterranean coast.
This was a part of the Eyalet of Damascus up to 1660, when it was integrated with Sandaki Sidon in separate eyalet, which capital Tzfat during the short period of time was.
At last, from the middle of 19th century it was a part of the Vilayet of Sidon.
Orthodox Sunni courts made in Tzfat decisions on affairs from Iqbara, in Al-Zitan and so remote places as Mesd el-Alam.
During a transition period from Egyptian to the Osmano-Turkish board in 1517, the local Jewish community was exposed to cruel attacks, murders and robberies as the local sheikhs removed aside made attempts to restore the control after deprivation of their power by the arriving Turks. During the late Mameluki period, since 1525-1526, Tzfat's population consisted of 633 Muslim families, 40 Muslim bachelors, 26 religious Muslims, 9 disabled Muslims, 232 Jewish families and 60 soldiers' families. In 1553-1554 the population consisted of 1.121 Muslim households, 222 single Muslims, 54 Muslim religious leaders, 716 Jewish households, 56 single Jews and 9 disabled people. In 1577 Eliezer to Ashkenazi and his son Isaac from Prague to Tzfat installed the Ivritsky press. It was the first press in all Ottoman Empire. In 1584 in the city 32 synagogues were registered. The economic downturn which began after 1560, and decrees about exiles by 1583 devastated the Jewish community. Local Arabs attacked remained, and 2 epidemics in 1589 and 1594 caused a bigger loss to the Jewish presence. For 17th century the Jewish settlements of Galilee underwent economic and demographic downturn, and Tzfat didn't become an exception.
About 1625 Khwarazmi said that the city is inhabited generally by Jews who had synagogues and schools and for whose life support by Jews of other parts of the world donations were brought.
5 of 1628 the city got under the power of Druses, and 5 years was again taken by Ottomans later. In 1660, during the distemper which followed death of Mulcaim of Mayon, Druzes destroyed Tzfat and Tiberias, and some from the former Jewish inhabitants returned to Tzfat by 1662.
As nearby Tiberias remained thrown within several decades, Tzfat found a key position among the Jewish communities of Galilee.
They say that in 1665 in the city the movement Shatai Tzvi appeared. In 1742 the outbreak of plague mowed clean the population, and the Middle Eastern earthquake of 1759 left the city in ruins, having destroyed 200 of its inhabitants. Inflow of the Russian Jews in 1776 and 1781, and the Lithuanian Jews from Persia in 1809 and 1810, inhaled life in community again.
In 1812 one more epidemic of plague destroyed 80% of the Jewish population, and the Jewish inhabitants who in 1819 remained were captured by the governor Akri Abdullah Pasha for the sake of repayment.
During the period of the Egyptian domination the city endured a sharp slowdown, an especially strong blow was struck to the Jewish community. During Great Tzfatsky disorder of 1834 the most part of the Jewish quarter was destroyed by the rebelled Arabs who plundered the city for many weeks. In 1837 in Tzfat there were about 400 Jews.
The Galilean earthquake of 1837 was especially catastrophic for the Jewish population as the Jewish quarter was located on a hill slope.
About a half of all its number died. 1507 of 2158 died inhabitants were Ottoman citizens. Yushni, the Muslim sector of the city, underwent much smaller destruction. In 1838 Druze insurgents plundered the city for 3 days, having killed many of Jews. In 1840 the Ottoman board was restored. In 1847 Tzfat plague collapsed again.
The Jewish population increased in the second half of 19th century thanks to immigration from Persia, Morocco and Algeria.
Moshe Montefiore 7 times was visited by Tzfat and financed restoration of the most part of the city. However, almost all monuments to antiquity of Tzfat were destroyed by earthquakes. The political force in Tzfat was Kader's family. At the end of Ottoman board this family owned 50,000 dunamam. This property included 8 villages around Tzfat. In the period of the British Mandate in Palestine Tzfat remained a mixed city, and ethnic tension between Jews and Arabs within the 1920th grew. When the Palestinian revolts of 1929 broke out, Tzfat and Hebron became large points of collisions. During disorder on August 29, 1929 by local Arabs killed from 18 to 21 Jews, including women and children, 280 were wounded. 200 houses on the main Jewish street in the city were plundered and set on fire. During the Arab Revolt in 1936-1939 Hagan and forces of self-defense created by the Jewish residents about 200 Jews of Tzfat, but not all managed to protect.
On August 13, 1936 Arabs managed to get into the house on Unger Street, an old Jewish quarter where all family gathered at supper and to make their slaughter.
They killed 36-year-old Alta, the copyist of the Torah, and his children. 9-year Jaffa, 7-year-old Hava and 6-year-old Abraham. Nathan Shore provides memoirs of witnesses which gathered on the crime scene in the book History Tzfata. On a floor the person lay. A half of his head was absent, only the beard, a part of a nose and the right eye was visible. The body lay in a blood pool. In the neighboring room among dishes and ware lay three the blood-stained nurseries of a corpse. Eyes of two were still open. The elderly woman, their grandmother, in despair rushed about from the room to the room. The wounded mother in a semi-conscious state passed from one child to another. She didn't shout and didn't cry, but only she repeated in Yiddish, "Why they, but not I." One her hand was in blood, and the torn-off finger dangled on a skin scrap.
According to the plan of the United Nations for the partition of Palestine, Tzfat was included in the part of Palestine which was allocated for the Jewish state offered by the plan.
By the beginning of the Arab-Israeli War of 1947-49, the city was the residence about 1,700 Jews, mainly religious and aged, and also about 120,000 Arabs. In February 1948, Muslim Arabs attacked the Jewish bus trying to reach Tzfat, and the Jewish quarter of the city underwent a siege. Muslims. The British troops which were there didn't interfere. According to Martin Gilbert, stocks of food began to come to an end. Even there was desperately not enough water and flour. Every day the attacking Arabs moved ahead closer to heart of the Jewish quarter, systematically blowing up the Jewish houses in process of the approach to the central part. On April 16, on the same day when the British troops were evacuated from Tzfat, -200 local Arab militiamen, with assistance of more than 200 soldiers of the Arab Liberation Army, tried to occupy the Jewish quarter of the city. They were beaten off by the Jewish garrison consisting of about 200 fighters of Haganah, men and women, strengthened by Palmach's platoon. The Arab Liberation Army planned occupation of all city on May 10, and in the run-up to this event placed artillery pieces on the hill adjacent to the Jewish quarter and started his firing. On May 6 there was a land attack of Palmach on the Arab part of Tzfat, which was a part of the Operation Yiftach. Providing a corridor through mountains by means of occupation of the Arab village of Beria was the first stage of the plan of Palmach for capture Tzfat. The 3rd Battalion didn't manage to lock on a main goal, Citadel, however it adequately frightened the Arab population to induce to further flight, is equal as to the emergency appeals about the external help and attempt to achieve truce.
The Secretary General of the Arab League Abdul Rahman Hassan Azam claimed that exile of residents of the Arab villages along the Syrian and Lebanese borders, in particular from the places located on roads on which the Arab active armed forces could enter the country, was the purpose of the plan of Danab.
He noted that Acre and Tzfat were in special danger, however calls for help were ignored, and the British, which had less than a week before the termination of the mandate to Palestine now, also didn't interfere to prevent the second, and the last, the attack of Haganah, who began in the evening on May 9 with mortar fire at key points in Tzfat.
After fire preparation, Palmach's infantry in heavy fighting took a citadel, Beit Shalva and a police fort.
3 dominating Tzfat's buildings.
For May 10, Haganah's mortars continued to bombard the Arab areas that led to the fires in the designated zone and in field warehouses of fuel, which as a result blew up.
Pomp 3's I intentionally left open for a way of an exit for the population, to stimulate his outcome. According to Gilbert, Tzfat's Arabs began to leave, including the commander of the Arab forces Adiba Shishakli. Later the Prime Minister of Syria. After isolation of a police fort on the Mount Canaan, his defenders receded without fight. Tzfat's falling was blow to moral spirit of Arabs to all region. thus that invasion of regular Arab armies into Palestine was considered as inevitable.
As soon as in 11-12 days the British at last leave.
Many Arabs believe that prudence demands from them to leave these places until Jews aren't defeated and they won't be able to return to the houses. About 12000, by some estimates 15000, ran from Tzfat and Steel, a heavy burden for the Arab military campaign. Among them there was a family of Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, who was born in Tzfat, president of the Palestinian National Authority. Later Abu Mazen remembered. We left the city at night and on foot went to the Jordan River, and over time lodged in Damascus. People had a desire to run. They were afraid of punishment from the Zionist terrorist groups, especially those which worked in Tzfat.
Those from us someone lived in Tzfat in particular were afraid the Jews concealed old thirst of revenge for what occurred during the revolt of 1929.
It was in memory of our families and parents. People understood that the balance of forces changed and therefore all city was left on the basis of this rational choice, for the sake of rescue of our lives and property. In 2012 Abbas said publicly, "Earlier I visited Tzfat once. I want to see Tzfat. It's my right to see it but not to live there." By May 11, 1948 the city was completely under control of the Jewish paramilitary forces. The remaining part of the Arab population of the city was moved. In 1974 102 Israeli Jewish school students from Tzfat, during the school excursion, were taken hostage by a group of the Palestinian fighters of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Children slept at school in Mayalota. In the incident which became known under the name Malitsky slaughter, 22 of these school students were aggressors among the killed.
During the 1990th and the beginning of the war, the city accepted thousands of Jewish immigrants from Russia and Ethiopia.
The Beta Israel. In July 2006 the missiles launched by Hezbollah from the southern Lebanon struck Tzfat, what led to death of one person and to wound of several. Many inhabitants were evacuated from the city. On July 22 4 persons were wounded in time of missile attack. Now Tzfat, generally Jewish city with the mixed religious and secular residential districts. A small amount of the Russian Christians and Maronites lives in him. The city kept the unique status of the center of the Jewish training. Today in Tzfat there are numerous operating synagogues and a yeshiva. Tzfat is famous for a colony of artists, galleries and workshops in which works of local masters are exposed.
In the territory of colony of artists there are synagogues, known in the Jewish world, demonstrating blossoming of the Jewish culture in the city a half millennium ago when Tzfat was one of the world centers of a Kabbalah.
In the city the deficiency of jobs. In the south of the city is the industrial zone presented to the B&B plants and Strauss factory and also several small private workshops. The largest employer in the district, the medical center, hospital, Ziv. Cheese dairies in the neighborhood of Tzfat are famous for semi-solid Tzfatsky cheese.
In Tzfat there takes place the annual World Tzfatsky Festival of Kluzersky music, the world's largest in this musical genre.
According to the Central Statistical Bureau of Israel, the population for the beginning of 2020 made 36094 persons. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.